Hello, and welcome to The Queer Gaze, a gay movie podcast dedicated to examining queer representation and issues.
We're continuing our sex work and pornography theme with Mikko Mäkelä's 2024 film Sebastian. If you want to hear more of the discussion, including our Chili Pepper Award, please support The Queer Gaze at patreon.com/thequeergaze.
You'll also get early access to regular main feed episodes and extra content for every single episode.
And you can follow us on social media at The Queer Gaze.
All right. Hello, Conrad. Welcome back to Sex Work and Pornography.
Indeed, yes. And we are exploring sex work this time in a slightly different angle than we have explored it before.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one because I think I may have oversold it, and then we were having an offline conversation where felt like maybe the film overstays its welcome just a smidge.
Yes, it's a 2-hour movie. It's called Sebastian, a 2024 queer drama that premiered at Sundance, I believe. And it marked out Finnish director Mikko Mäkelä as one to watch, I think, a rising star in the queer filmmaking space. We've come across him before in A Moment in the Reeds, see our episode 2, which we thought had promise, but wasn't completely satisfied with, I think it's fair to say. This new film is set against the restless grind culture of present-day London. Sebastian taps into late-stage millennial anxieties, the precariousness of artistic authenticity, and sexual identity. The story centers on Max, played by Ruaridh Mollica, a 25-year-old aspiring novelist, threading the needle between his literary ambitions and his research, moonlighting as an online sex worker under the pseudonym Sebastian. Along the way, he forms a tender connection with one of his clients, Nicholas, played by Jonathan Hyde, and his double life becomes a crucible for self-discovery. Or at least I think that's what the director wants us to think. How did you find the central premise of this movie? I found it a little bit self-conscious.
Yes, yeah, so that was part of our discussion offline, was how much is the film aware of itself and how much of it is commenting on the nature of a queer media text, right? In some ways, it seems to be making creative decisions based on what people expect or what financiers or the mass public want to see out of it. And I think in that regard, it can be interesting, but it's not entirely clear how much of it is intentional. Like, I think the fact that it's here suggests that there's a level of awareness, and yet at the same time, as we said, like, the film overstays its welcome. It doesn't seem to have a good sense of exactly what kind of story it's telling, or maybe even what the takeaway is. There are moments that really work for me in this, but I had seen this film before, so I caught it out of Sundance. I wrote a review for my site, and I quite liked it. I think I gave it like 4 out of 5 stars. And this time I was quite a bit cooler on it because the gaps seemed much more evident to me this time around. But there's a lot of really intriguing elements overall. It just doesn't come together as a whole.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't quite stick the landing. And I think, as you say, that's partly because I can't quite tell what story this is trying to convey. Right. So you enter into the story with Max already living this double life.
Right. But he seems green. Like, you get the impression he hasn't done it for very long.
Yeah, he's not an accomplished sex worker. He seems very nervous and very ill at ease doing it. Yeah. And the film charts, I think, a little bit of a stereotypical descent into obsession that undermines your regular work life and puts a strain on your familial and personal relationships. Or at least, I mean, he doesn't actually have a regular partner.
No.
But it certainly screws up his attempt to have a social life as well as a work life. That's the part that I found a little bit tropey.
Yeah, so Max is an aspiring novelist, but he also has a day job. So he really wants to be an accomplished writer. He wants to be taken very seriously. He takes his craft very seriously. So he has a day job at a magazine. He has just been published in a book of short stories that is getting a lot of acclaim. So he's on the rise in the literary world. And then he's also pitched himself to his agent as, hey, I've got a book in the works, and he's very aggressive about the timeline. To me, knowing anything about how books are published, I was like, wait, you think you're going to submit a draft in 1 month and it's going to get published as a complete book next year? What fantasy world are we living in? But okay, sure. So Max is basically using his sex work, kind of evening dalliances as fodder for the book. And he writes this under the auspices of saying, oh, well, sex work has now changed. Sex workers don't feel a sense of stigma. They don't feel shame. They're actually very open and comfortable with it. And he's trying to live that, but he himself does feel shame. And he doesn't ever confide in anyone about his sex work until the very end of the film. So to me, that's an okay journey. The minute it starts to intercede on his personal life and, he's failing at work, he ends up getting fired. Yeah, he's taking sex practices from his evening dalliances and using them in the bedroom with regular folks, and it's not working. That could be interesting, but you're right, it's quite a bit more tropey and familiar. And then we also get a third act, I'm not even going to say twist, but it's a narrative development that I don't enjoy, and it feels really tacked on. And I think it ultimately leaves me with a bit of a sour taste in my mouth as we go into the end of the film.
Yes, I would agree with all of that. The thing that really threw me off, I was starting to wonder whether we had an unreliable narrator, because he is living a double life. And at one point, his publisher is complaining about the direction that his novel is taking as he's submitting new chapters, because he is starting to develop a more tender, introspective relationship with Nicholas. He starts talking about it as being this intergenerational experience, with gay men learning from previous generations about their experience. And I thought, well, that's really compelling. Let's talk about that. Let's explore that. We don't do that.
We don't. And it's in part because the agent says, well, this isn't what you originally pitched me, and I don't think that our readership would care for it. And this, I think you and I are in agreement, feels like the film commenting on the parameters, the very strict parameters of what queer films are allowed to indulge in. We can't do a gay Harold and Maude because nobody wants to see it. What people want to see is different variations of the sex work, ooh, how is this going to fuck up your life? Let's get some group sex. Let's get some drugs in. Let's get lost in Brussels and so on. And I wish that if the film was going to go in that direction, it's like, do that then. Like, go whole hog. But the film seems very trepidatious about whether or not that's actually intentional.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what it wants to do. So I thought that we were going to have the reveal because the publisher says to him, find a way to ramp up the stakes.
Right. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we get a scene where his writing is discovered by one of his clients, and there's a threat of violence. It gets very, very tense, and he gets thrown out, and he finds himself in Brussels without his wallet.
Right.
And this becomes like the third act crisis. And I thought, please reveal that this is just in the novel and that this didn't happen. And that really he's having this wonderful sugar daddy relationship with
Jonathan Hyde.
Nicholas. Yeah, with Jonathan Hyde, because that was the only genuine emotional connection I saw in the whole film.
Right.
But sadly, I don't think that's what's happening.
No, because we actually have Nicholas meeting him at the train station after he makes this desperate late night phone call. I've tried to find my way out of this. I tried to call mom, but I've never confided in her about what I'm actually doing. And she's not super queer supportive. So yeah, in some ways, this feels more akin to the kind of queer narratives that I felt like we were really seeing on the film festival circuit back in the late 90s. Like when I was coming of age and I was really trying to immerse myself in queer cinema, checking out new releases and so on, I felt like I would go to see these films that would sell themselves as a little bit salacious, right? Like, here's a young, hot sex worker getting into trouble and learning life lessons, but, you know, having hot sex, doing drugs, group sex, blah, blah, blah. And it feels like it's just checking all of those boxes. But then I kept waiting for a more contemporary twist. Like, this movie's only a couple of years old. Why does this level of storytelling feel so antiquated?
Yeah. And the thing that I find I struggle with is that the young author, who I have to say does look like the writer-director somewhat. I saw them in an interview panel on YouTube, and I thought, sorry, which one's which? Because,
it's like the gays who date each other, but they look identical.
Yeah, I did wonder if he was channeling himself into this character in any meaningful way. I mean, I'm not suggesting it's autobiographical, but I think that, I think he did say that his first movie, A Moment in the Reeds, sort of channeled aspects of his experience. But there is this moment where Max says that he's concerned that his short stories, they're potent, but he's worried that they don't mean anything. They're not saying anything. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I wonder if the director is speaking to us here, because this film is trying to be poignant. It's really straining for it. In fact, it strains for it so hard that at the end it makes a few missteps, including its final shot, which I'm sorry, I just found risible. I laughed at it.
Oh, no. Okay. Interesting. Because I don't agree with you that I think the movie is going for poignancy, because outside of all the scenes with Nicholas, I feel like the movie has narrative stakes. It has character stakes, the threat of discovery, which we've talked about a couple of times in this specific theme around sex work and pornography. It is a lot of shame. It's a lot of secret. Don't let your regular family, your friends in, because there's something dirty about it. Oh, taking money for sex? It's like, okay. Which is one of the reasons I get frustrated with this particular film, because I do think it'd be novel to say, what does a sex worker who's not ashamed of what they're doing actually look like? Because that does feel so much more contemporary.
Yeah, that feels interesting. The whole bit about digital hustlers in modern London, that so many students, he says he was inspired by their lack of shame, and how this is just, hey, I'm also on OnlyFans showing off my feet, to pay the rent.
Right.
That's interesting. I would like to have seen that, to have experienced that, to have been challenged by it intellectually and emotionally. Yeah. But I didn't get that. I end up with this guy that's very, very hesitant about it all and sort of play acting at it and doing it badly.
Yeah. And so to circle back to your issue with poignancy, I felt like the only time the film comes alive as its own text were the scenes with Max and then Nicholas. Like, the moments where the two of them are just talking about this queer history, and Nicholas talks about his partner of 29 years, Daniel, dying of a stroke, and then how he's been struggling for the last couple of years to make connections, and we start going to the theater and that kind of stuff. Like, sure, that's also a familiar story, but these two actors have genuine chemistry, and I enjoy those moments where we get to see them together. And sure, part of it is contrasted by Max's / Sebastian's other clients who he's not connecting with, and he's struggling. He's either taken the little blue pill to get it up in the opening scene, or he's getting railed by this. I mean, the actor is Icelandic, but I think we're just meant to assume he's vaguely European, the guy who takes him to Brussels.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because that feels like the safer storytelling avenue. And I would love to know if Michele wanted to do something a little bit more about this intergenerational romance, but he was told, well, nobody wants to see that. Nobody's going to buy it, and you need to amp up the stakes.
Yeah, that's why I wondered whether the central character's literary journey and his fight with his publisher was supposed to be an intertextual reference to the writer-director and his battles with producers and financiers of films. Yeah. I hope not, because I would have loved to have seen the Harold and Maude love story and explored what it's truly like to be a digital hustler who's extracting money from the baby boomers and Gen X, because that's the only way that the next generations can financially survive, and because of their relationship to their body, and because the way technology has changed our relationship with sex.
Yep. That's not here. That's not this movie.
Here. It's not here. And you know, you shouldn't criticize a movie for not being the thing that you wanted, but at the same time, I think the movie wanted to be that, didn't it? I think it did.
It's the dangling promise, right? Like, in some ways, that's what the film establishes. It might be interested in interrogating. And then, I mean, I do think, at a certain point, in order to make this conversation constructive for ourselves, we will have to pull back and just sort of say, okay, so what this story is actually telling is the story of someone who has a certain level of internalized homophobia and isn't comfortable basically speaking about who they truly are. Like, I guess the other issue I have with the film is that despite the fact that Mollica is, I think, a very compelling actor, it's also a very interior-minded performance. He's keeping to himself too much, and we don't know a ton about him except for what he expresses to his best friend Amna, who is played by Hiftu Quasem. And he doesn't obviously tell her much. Like, their friendship is actually very shit. She supports him unequivocally, and he can't be bothered to support her in any capacity. Because I do think that's the other piece of this coin that you were talking about, where how much of him is unreliable as a protagonist. I think it's also how much of him is likable, right? It's shades of some of these other texts that we've talked about, where, especially in sex work and pornography, these characters, they're not great people.
Yeah. I'm glad you raised that, because I did wonder, how much do we like Max? How much do we like Sebastian? Now, the actor and the director have spoken about how they didn't really want it to be a Jekyll and Hyde story.
Okay.
That him as Sebastian isn't really entering into some different space. He is trying to perform a certain kind of confidence that he genuinely doesn't seem to have.
Right.
But it isn't so much a story about his personality fragmenting, although it does still indulge in images with mirrors and multiple reflections on windows and glass late at night when he's calling his mother, and the camera's not on stilts anymore, and it's wobbling all over the place to show how fragmented he is, which, you know,
how do you really feel, Conrad?
Yeah, I know. It feels a little bit mannered and obvious sometimes. Never more so than in the fourth wall break at the end of the movie, which I just couldn't put up with. But you're right. Is he likable? And it is a genuine problem, I think, because the only time he's likable is when he's with Nicholas.
Well, it's because it feels like that's the only time he's being vulnerable and real, and the rest of the time he's either putting on a farce of what his clients want him to be, or he's putting on a farce of what he thinks a successful writer needs to be. And I do think that ultimately that is what the film is interrogating. It's a character study of this person who's not being honest about who they truly are. And by the end of the film, you get to a point where they're confident in saying, yeah, you know what? I'm a sex worker and I'm not going to lie about it anymore because I don't have the shame. You know, when I said I didn't have shame at the beginning, that was a lie. And it takes me this movie to come to a sort of self-realization. And I think if we can only look at the film in those parameters, then it is more successful at what it's trying to do. I think you and I would both probably agree it's a slightly less interesting movie as a result. The reason that we're harping on elements that we feel are going unfulfilled or unexplored is because those are the pieces that would have helped this movie to distinguish itself a little bit more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not terribly sure it does work as that story either.
Oh, really? Okay. Even in its most basic, just character study, guy finds acceptance, you know?
No, I don't think so, because you never get the payoff with his family relationship whatsoever, even though it's clear that he doesn't talk to his mother about his personal relationships, even though she's aware of his queer identity.
Right.
He can't confide in her even at the end of the movie, as far as we can tell. I don't know. And does he want to be a sex worker?
I think we have to assume yes, because he's still doing it, but he's doing it out of his own place at the end of the film. So
yeah, and confidently, and then says to the camera, "You can ask me anything." But is this really him? Because it doesn't look like it is him at any point, I have to say.
I think it would work so much better if, instead of doing this last act trip to Brussels with the high stakes and, oh my God, I'm, in financial peril and my laptop has been stolen and I don't have my wallet and that kind of stuff. I think if we had have done something different that would have allowed him even just getting publicly exposed to his writing group or outed at the magazine or something, but we've taken away those stakes by this point because he's not engaging with those groups anymore. Like, the whole trip to Brussels is so emblematic of, oh, this film has taken a wrong turn. I don't know that it fully understands what it is trying to do.
Yeah, I think so too, because the only stakes that you would have there is that maybe Nicholas will find out that he's with another client and it may jeopardize that relationship. But surely Nicholas knows what he does and will not be fazed by this at all. So I don't really know what the stakes are in that scene. He's lost everything. So exactly what is at stake? Not much. He's mildly inconvenienced in Brussels. And I have a word or two to say about that when we get to the tip of the shade as well. I also have a lot to say about the sex scenes because it is diametrically opposed to what I was saying about Mysterious Skin, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, that is a lovely tease. So why don't we end this episode and we'll move our discussion over to Patreon so you can tell me more. So, folks, if you want to join us, it's about $3 a month. You get bonus episodes for every single episode, including this one. So if you want to hear Conrad really rant against the railing, it would be over at patreon.com/thequeergaze. And if you are unable to give us a couple of dollars, or you're just not interested, you just want to listen for free, that is completely fine as well. Then we will see you back here in a couple of weeks. We're going to continue talking about sex work and pornography, but we're going to move the location to Sao Paulo so that we can talk about Marcelo Caetano's 2024 drama, Baby.
Ooh, can't wait.